Welcome back. Today we are looking at an A2, which is in the -1 stream, the essay. And we're going to be looking at an essay that is associated with the 30-1 course, but at the same time, the steps that we're doing here to analyze the source will also provide a guide for Social 20 and Social 10-1. So, analysis of the source, step 1. Read the prompt once to identify the theme. So we try to read the prompt as a whole. Individualism creates the vision that destroys society. The path to a nation's full potential is best achieved through collectivism. So I read the entire prompt once so that I can get the big picture. What is this source about? What is the theme of the source? So when I read it, I would annotate it on the page. I'd write some notes next to the source on the page. And some things that pop in my mind, some possible themes here could be the role of government, the role of citizen. And associated with that would be this centuries-old freedom versus control struggle between individuals and governments, and the resulting and sometimes evolving relationships that citizens often have with their government. Now, how did I get to that theme? Individualism creates the vision that destroys society. The path to a nation's full potential is best achieved through collectivism. So the theme here is, this idea of full potential, the full potential of a nation, and we're contrasting one path, which is through individualism, and one path that is through collectivism. And with both of those paths, there's different roles that the state and the citizens would play. So, within the source big picture, we can see that the theme here really comes back to, what role should the government play and what role should the citizen play? How much freedom should citizens have? How much control should the government have? Now, this is a common theme throughout Social 30. In Social 20, common themes will be struggling with the role of government, the role of citizens as it relates to nationalism. Given a time of crisis during a war, should we be promoting nationalism? During a time of war, what is the role of citizen to serve the nation, kind of thing? And in Social 10, common themes will be about globalism. Should we globalize? To what extent should we globalize, or to what extent should we isolate from the global village? And within that globalization, what are some roles that citizens can play to either globalize or to defend against globalism? And what are some roles that the government can play to promote globalism or to protect their citizens and their state from globalism, from the forces of the global village? But here, we're talking about freedom versus control. Now, after you read through the prompt once to do the big picture thing and you contemplate it, that process might take 2 or 3 minutes. Next step, read the prompt to identify a goal. So every prompt is going to have a goal within it. So individualism creates the vision that destroys society. The path to a nation's full potential is best achieved through collectivism. Sometimes the goal will be explicitly stated. Sometimes the goal will be implicitly inferred. So here we have the use of the term full potential. The path to a nation's full potential is best achieved through collectivism. Here the goal is full potential. So identifying the goal of the source, the source is opening up a conversation as to how to best achieve the goal of full potential of a nation. To identify that goal is a key step in the analysis of source, because it really is identifying, what is the purpose of this source? Why does this source exist? And this source, the purpose of this source is to exist, to create a conversation, and within that conversation to persuade us about an ideological perspective on the path to achieve this goal. So I always say that identify the theme, step 1. Step 2, what is the purpose? What is the goal of this? Identify a goal. I'm even going to go back and type in purpose of the statement right there, because that's what that is. So here the goal is full potential. Now, Dan Rates, who used to be the department head here at WCHS, he did an excellent job of breaking language down. So we need to really massage out that word full potential and say, what does it mean? How do we measure full potential? Is it an economic measurement like GDP or per capita income, or maybe an economic measurement like standard of living, or is it a measurement of maybe our quality of life and an associated number like our gross national happiness that comes from Social 10 and out of Bhutan? So what are we measuring here? How do we measure full potential? Is it a measurement that is a macro measurement, a nation level measurement, or is it a microeconomic measurement, an individual level term? So in order to fully analyze this source, we have to analyze what's the purpose here. The goal is full potential. Then if that's the goal, then what does that mean? What does full potential look like? If you don't do that, you're not really specifically, and that's a PF, that's 80, or insightfully unpacking the source. You're reading past that word, and I think that critically that's a misstep. So identify the goal, and within that goal, here we have key language. Tell us what that means. And what does full potential look like? And while we're unpacking what it means, we can talk about the significance here of who defines it. Not only is it important what it means, but it's as equally, or if not more equally important, by who defines what it means. So there might be a division of society. So significance and division of society surrounding the conversation inspired by the source are key steps in unpacking the source. But there might be a division of society surrounding the issue presented. Might philosophers disagree about what full potential looks like? Fascists may envision full potential as the strong controlling others, the strong controlling the weak, the strong feeding on the weak. And they use ultranationalism and an aggressive and militant foreign policy as a means to an end in a Machiavellian way. So this has, echoes of social Darwinism, of ethnocentrism, of might is right. It goes all the way back to Social 10 when we talk about, the strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must, that ancient Athenian philosophy. So definitely fascists may envision full potential as the strong feeding on the weak, controlling others. Whereas communists would say, no, if a society is achieving their full potential, ultimately the goal is not inequality, the goal is equality. The goal is egalitarianism. So it's important to understand that there's a division of society surrounding the definition of the key term within the problem, and that is significant because depending upon who defines it, you may be steering the nation towards different goals. Communism and fascism are going to create two different ends. In communism, you're going to have from each according to his ability to each according to his need. Capitalists may envision full potential as the true wealth of a nation being unlocked. But how do we do that? We don't unlock the true wealth of a nation through the state. We unlock the true wealth of a nation through the independence from the state. We need an invisible hand to guide the economy. We need economic freedom. We need self-interest. We need private property. We need competition. We need government to create legislation that protects private property, and then the government needs to get out of the way. So capitalists have a different vision than communists. Communists have a different vision than fascists. Political conservatives might argue that full potential must include ties to the great chain of being that Edmund Burke would talk about, that we must honor our ancestors as we unpack our full potential. That in order to truly achieve our full potential in 2020 or whatever year it is when you're listening to this, then you have to still honor those ancestors that their sacrifices, their lives brought us to this point in history. That our full potential must include our traditions, not exclude them. That if we exclude our traditions, then our full potential is not being met. Progressives may argue against that conservative idea of honoring tradition and more look towards something that is more fluid, more fluidity. For example, progressives may say the full potential of individuals or of the nation can only be unlocked when we allow for fluidity, when we allow for plurality and multiplicity and things like self-identification, including fluidity of gender identification. So lots of different things there. So first step was identify the theme. Then within that theme, what's the goal? Here the goal is full potential. And then we're like, you know what, how do we measure that? And maybe more importantly, who's defining that? And how might we have a division of society surrounding that term? So The next step after you identify, here's the goal, source typically has here's a problem associated with the goal. Here's a problem, here's a challenge, here's an issue that because it exists, the goal is not certain. We're not definitely going to achieve that. There's an obstacle in the way. The next step is to identify what is that obstacle. Here the problem is, go back to the source, read it, destruction of society, right? That we might not achieve our full potential, we might actually see the destruction of society. That's the complete opposite. So why is it significant that we address the issue? Well, why is it significant that we avoid the destruction of society is quite clear. But taken to an extreme, if society doesn't address the issue presented, we may arrive at destruction of society. What does that look like? Use evidence to further the perspective. So this is another key step in analyzing a source. I'm going to change that to red. We're going to use evidence to further the perspective of the source. Offer an example or examples of how individualism, which is the threat, the issue that the source is presenting, individualism is going to lead to the destruction of society. Offer examples, evidence that can further the perspective that individualism leads to the destruction of society. So how does individualism destroy society? Well, economically, economic individualism can destroy society as selfish, short-term thinking common to capitalism can create ecological changing conditions that might lead to Social 10, the death of birth. So this is related to issues 3 and 4 of Social 10. This is where you can talk about the externality of our economic freedom. You can talk about the lack of sustainability. You can talk about the impact on our biosphere, this thin layer of livable space in the known universe. And you can talk about this death of birth that we live in, this age of stupid. You can talk about all of the compounding effects, these results, the externality of capitalism, including the animal habitat destruction, the ozone depletion, acid rain, global warming, climate change, soil erosion, water and air pollution. You can talk about all of these challenges that have been connected to as a consequence of our economic freedom. Because we have economic freedom, we have these ecological damages. Or because of economic freedom, we have social problems like the exploitation of one class by another. We have social problems like the exploitation of one race by another, or one gender by another. So it doesn't have to be just how capitalism has damaged the earth, it is how maybe capitalism and individualism has damaged society. It is that malaise of modernity, right? It is that the corruption of our cornerstone values. Lots of Social 10 stuff there, so hopefully you remember Social 10. The next thing we can look at is political individualism. How political individualism can destroy society, as it can encourage division, and it encourages disunity that can tear apart a nation. We have seen at times the United States being torn apart along party lines, and maybe that will only get worse. Introducing the freedom to question the state, introducing dissent, introducing some form of of grassroots accountability actually led to the downfall of the Soviet Union. So, the source is talking about, if we allow individualism, it'll lead to the destruction of society. This is actually what happened in the Soviet Union. Being that Mikhail Gorbachev introduced his political reforms, his glasnost, and included in glasnost was this idea of a breath of life within the stale Politburo. They wanted the one-party state to be more open to the will of the people. Well, ultimately, when the will of the people was allowed to be expressed, many people in Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, and ultimately Russia said, you know what, it's our will, we don't want to be in the USSR. We want our self-autonomy. We want nationhood. So introducing individualism actually did lead to the downfall of the Soviet Union. That's evidence that we can use to further the perspective of the source. Economic individualism could lead to the destruction of the biosphere, and that would be the death of all societies. So again, that's evidence we could use to further the perspective of the source. Social individualism can destroy society. Perhaps you can think of a hypothetical case study there. There's a connection to theory as well. So you got people like Sorel that says a society will tend to decay unless it is led by an authoritarian leader. So at a theoretical level, Sorel argues in favor of the ideological perspective presented here. He's saying, yeah, of course, individualism's divisive, and it will ultimately lead to the destruction of society. That's why we need a strong authoritarian leader. So again, to continue the previous attempt at addressing the significance of the issue presented and any related division of society, we can further unpack the language. So up above, when we looked at the goal, we talked about how there's some division of society within that goal and there's significance within that goal. We can do that here as well. So the source claims that individualism creates division that destroys society. So that's a linchpin, or like a cornerstone, a key assumption of the source, right? An assumption of the source is that individualism will create division that destroys society. Therefore, the source is, in essence, an anti-individualist, biased source. The source is based on this anti-individualist bias that assumes division isn't the purpose of society. So we need to identify some of the assumptions, the bias of the source, and by identifying those assumptions and bias, we can further the significance and division of society that would respond to the source. So here, an assumption of the source is that division isn't the purpose of society, and division destroys society. Well, some people might say, no, you know what? Division is the purpose of society. We need division of thought. If we don't have division of thought, we might lead to ideological stagnation. We need dissent. We need protest. We need opposition. And this makes me think of Voltaire. You know, I may not agree with what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. You know, that kind of idea is the idea that, you know, within society we need a healthy debate and healthy conversation to continue the evolution of us as ideological beings. That if we try to have just one ideology permeate around all of society, then we will stagnate, and stagnation will lead to death. So there is a central assumption here that division destroys society, and individualists would say, no, it's division that will save society. That if society is going to grow and progress, we need division. Because it's through division that we will have people come up with new ideas. So I think World War Z, I'm getting a little distracted here, but I'm thinking of World War Z when the character that Brad Pitt plays travels to Israel, and he's like, you know what, you guys were ahead of everyone else here. Why did you guys start saying zombies? You know, why did you identify the threat as zombies? And his liaison with Mossad within Israel, he's saying, well, we have this 10th man rule. You know, following the invasion during Yom Kippur, the Israeli Jewish people, they had to say, you know, we've been shocked and surprised too much in history. We've said, you know what, they're not going to attack during a holiday. They're not going to commit genocide against us during World War II. So they said, we created this new idea that if there's a group of 10 people discussing something and everyone agrees, it's the job of that 10th person to disagree and say, well, what if? You know, be the voice of opposition. What if it is zombies? So in that case, because he was the one saying, what if it's zombies, it helped protect Israel from a threat that everybody wasn't seeing. And even Gandhi says, you know, the truth is the truth. You know, even if you're the only one person that sees it, the truth is the truth. So if we silence opposition, if we silence division, then what we might be doing is silencing the truth. And that is very dangerous in any year. So that step, we're trying to identify, you know, what is the issue? What is the problem? And within the problem gives us a chance to talk about the significance and the division of society a little bit further. And it gives us a chance to show off how it connects a little bit to theory and to other case studies. Now, the key step here is, what is the solution? Now that we know the goal, now we know the problem, what is the solution? And the solution is the ideological perspective of the source. It's the solution that is what is being promoted, and what is being promoted is the perspective. And here it's simple, it's stated, collectivism. It says best achieved through collectivism. That's the solution. Collectivism is the path to the nation's full potential. But again, here, the analysis is dependent upon breaking down the language. Here it clearly states it's best achieved through collectivism. So we outline values associated with the ideological perspective. This time it's easy. Values associated with collectivism, they're in the textbook in 30 from pages 71 to 85. Note this, there is even dissension though among collectivists. So even though we can say these are the values of collectivists, not all collectivists value all of them, right? So Hitler, politically, he values the concentration of political authority. But economically, he's not a collectivist. Economically, he's not saying we need public property. Economically, he believes in capitalism. He wants the state to guide that capitalism, though. So Hitler and Stalin may agree on the centralization of political authority, but they're going to disagree about economic equality. So in terms of the complexity of the source is shown here because even among collectivists, there's going to be some dissension. I'm going to add that. This shows an element of complexity of the source. And if you're showing the complexity of the source, you know what? That's another step of analysis, isn't it? Also connect those values with the conflict between individualism and collectivism and the evolution of liberalism, which is also the theme that we had talked about earlier, right? So we're connecting it back to that theme that we talked about. And now you can use evidence to further the solution. Is there any evidence that we could use to further the ideological perspective? This is a key step. You could use theory. Marx would argue that individualism perpetuates the cycle of class conflict, and that it is only through collectivism that we can reach the end of history by achieving a utopia on earth. Hobbes would argue that individualism promotes freedom, and freedom will unleash our natural, violent tendencies that will result in brutal and short lives as we devolve into a state of war with each other. Rousseau would argue that individualism creates that malaise of modernity as it promotes selfishness and jealousy that divides the people. Sounds a lot like the source. You can look at history in conjunction with all that theory. The promotion of the enlightened ideas of individualism by revolutionaries destroyed the society that was the old regime of France, Social 20-1. Now, you could argue that maybe through destroying society, you can create something new, something better. So you could also, as a counter-argument, say the destruction of society is what is needed sometimes to create something new, like a phoenix being reborn. Contemporary, we have a TED Talk that I would really recommend that you watch from a Chinese investor and political scientist that he asks his audience to consider that there's more than one way to run a successful nation, and that the Chinese one-party state unites the people and has unlocked the full potential of China, and that the United States' full potential is not being unlocked because the people are divided. There's times when I have to say I might look at evidence and agree with that. What ideology or values or assumptions is the source challenging or rejecting? Another way to talk about the values assumptions of the source is to say this is a rejection or challenge of, in this case, liberalism, right? It's challenging liberalism. It's rejecting liberalism. By promoting collectivism, it is implicitly attacking individualism. But there is the word best attached to achieved through collectivism. So we can infer that the creator of the source does acknowledge that societies can prosper under individualism, but that they remain somehow tragically flawed, that there is a better way, that the flaw may be things like inequality or exploitation that we see in capitalism, or division or partisanship that we see in democracy, or apathy like we see in democracy. I'm going to add partisanship and apathy here. There it is. By looking at the values, we can also unpack key assumptions again. There should be some assumptions here about the nature of mankind, the purpose of life. You know, if our purpose is to serve the state, or if our purpose is to, serve our individual needs. In a Maslow hierarchy of needs, how do we fulfill those needs, and which needs are most important? And there's a document there to think a little bit more about the ideas about purpose of life. So if you go to that document, it talks about things like the Greek philosophical path to a good life, and if we can achieve that good life through freedom from or freedom through government. And again, it comes back to that idea of role of government, role of citizen. So there's some bonus features there. So when we unpack the source, we can infer that the measure of a good life for a citizen is to what extent they have worked to advance the full potential of the state. Because if that's the goal, then how do we know the good life of the citizen has been met? Well, the state has, through the actions of the citizens, reached that full potential. Giovanni Gentile says serving the state gives their life purpose. So again, I'm finding some theory, I'm finding some philosophy that furthers the perspective shown. We can continue our discussion about the division of society here as we explore that not everyone agrees that collectivism will unlock the full potential of the nation. Some may argue that individualism does that. Economically, you have Smith, right? It's not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, but it's from their self-interest that we can expect our breakfast, right? So you could look at philosophy like Smith economically, politically you could look at people like John Stuart Mill and John Locke and further that idea that not everybody agrees with this anti-individualist perspective. And now we've analyzed that source. Logically, the next step will be respond to the source, and I'll create a second video for that. So that's the analysis of source. Now, how long will that end up being? It's going to be more than a page, isn't it? To do all of those steps, it's going to be more than a page. But at the end, you're going to be able to look at it and say, I have comprehensively broken down the nuances of that source. I've unpacked the big rocks. I've discussed the significance, the complexity, the division of society, surrounding all of the key terms. I've included the ideological perspective of it. I've attached links back to the theme of the course, in this case, liberalism. I'm ready to move on, which would be respond to the source. And again, we'll go through that in part 2.